in coordination with the FNF State Office of the North Rhine-Westphalia. My name is Bipin Gimre, and I work here as a regional political analyst in the foundation. Since the Taliban returned to power in 2021 in Afghanistan, the country has entered a new and uncertain chapter. The Taliban 2.0 has made claims of reforms and inclusivity, yet the realities on the ground raise critical questions about governance, human rights, particularly rights of women and children, freedom of expression, and humanitarian urgency. American actress Meryl Streep once said in a talk show, "A bird may sing in Kabul, a girl may not. A cat can chase a squirrel into a park, but a girl cannot. A squirrel has more rights than a girl." This is a sad situation. Adding to this complexity is Afghanistan growing international isolations with no formal recognition from the global communities, frozen assets, and limited diplomatic engagements. The country is becoming increasingly cut off. This webinar seeks to unpack these complexities of this regime. I'm excited about the valuable insights that our speakers and panelists will share today and look forward to the fruitful discussion. Without further ado, let me introduce the moderator of today's webinar, Mr. Reza Ehsan. Mr. Ehsan is a doctoral candidate at the Department and the Faculty of Economics, South Asian University, New Delhi. He was the director of the Association of Hazara Voices for Justice 2023-2024. He is a co-founder of a participatory democracy organization for Afghanistan. The organization was founded in 2015 to work for strengthening democracy and democratic values in Afghanistan. He has worked in multiple international NGOs and has a research and indifferent research center. Now with this, I will hand over the floor to him to continue the discussion. Reza Ehsan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Bipin. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, to all of you. As Dr. Bipin mentioned that August 2021 changed many things in Afghanistan for millions of people. Well, since the Taliban took over of Afghanistan, not only the government's mechanism, but also the economy changed a lot, affected. According to some estimates, the economy of Afghanistan contracted by 25 to 30%, which leaving Afghanistan among one of the poorest countries in the world. Poverty, malnutrition, and food insecurity has risen significantly. Over 8 million citizens of Afghanistan has left the country and migrated to neighboring and European countries. Well, on the other hand, the government mechanism has completely changed, and the de facto Taliban government have come up with dozens of draconian and anti-human rights policies. And these policies have been, because of these policies, there have been no steps for recognition of Taliban as a government globally. So Afghanistan is going through a substantial humanitarian and economic crisis, and widespread human rights violation, particularly against women, girls, ethnic communities, and religious and ethnic minorities are happening. And Afghanistan's future looks bleak and uncertain. All this said, in today's webinar, we want to analyze Afghanistan's current political scenario, assess human rights situation, and focus on rights of women and marginalized groups. Today we have 4 distinguished panelists coming from various backgrounds. I'll introduce each of the panelists one by one, and we'll ask each of them questions. They can each take 4 to 5 minutes to answer each questions, which will in total take around 45 to 50 minutes. Then we'll have a 10 minutes Q&A session at the end. Anyone in the audience who has any questions, they can drop their questions in the chat box. Please be specific and clear, and mention name of the speakers your question is directed to. Let me start with introducing our first panelist, Ms. Shikheba Baburi. Ms. Baburi is a journalist and anthropologist. She is the founder of journalist network Taliban News, a network of reporters from Germany and Afghanistan. Ms. Baburi is author of Afghan Woman, a bargaining chip of politics, which analyzes the historical and political rule of Afghan women. She has been actively advocating women in Afghanistan. Very warm welcome to you, Ms. Baburi. It's great to have you today.
Thank you very much.
Our second panelist is Ms. Frishta Abbasi from Human Rights Watch. Ms. Abbasi is a researcher in the Asia Division of Human Rights Watch, focusing on research and documentation of ongoing abuses in Afghanistan. She was previously a legal advisor for the International Development Law Organization. Ms. Abbasi has published on human rights issues in Afghanistan and international media. Warm welcome to you too, Ms. Abbasi. Honored to have you here today. Our third panelist is Mr. Khalid Ramazi. Mr. Ramazi serves as Chief Executive Officer of the World Anti-Extremism Network, an international non-profit organization headquartered in Canada. He has served as the CEO of Afghanistan's Economic and Legal Studies. He is the founder of the Silk Road Station, an educational radio station in Afghanistan promoting the values of a free society. Mr. Ramazi is the author of The Stolen Republic and has co-authored a number of books. Welcome, Mr. Ramazi. Good to have you.
Thank you so much.
Our fourth panelist is Dr. Abbas Farasu. Dr. Abbas Farasu served as Afghanistan's charge d'affaires to Australia from 2014 to 2017 and held senior roles in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan during the Republic government. Currently, he is a researcher at La Trobe University and has taught political science at the University of Melbourne and Deakin. With over 50 years of experience in academia, he specializes in international security, contentious politics, and diplomacy. He is the author of the book Proxy War in Afghanistan. Warm welcome to you, Dr. Farasu. Good to have you today. Let me start by asking the first question from Ms. Baburi. Ms. Baburi, as a journalist and a women rights activist, how would you describe the post-2001 situation of Afghanistan? If you would give us a picture of what has happened after 2021, post-2021. And how have things developed in the past 3.5 years, and how is the current situation under the de facto Taliban government? Over to you.
Ms. Baburi, your mic.
Ms.
You're
Baburi,
mute.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
did you
I
hear
hope
the
you can hear me
question?
now.
Shall
Thank
I
you very
repeat
much. Yes, since the Taliban's return to power in August 2021, Afghanistan has experienced one of the most dramatic and devastating backlashes against women's rights in modern history. Within weeks, the gains made over 2 decades, access to education, employment, political participation, and freedom of expression were systematically rolled back. As you mentioned already, girls were banned from secondary schools and universities. Women were pushed out from most professions and public spaces because of increasingly of limits to them. This gender apartheid is not just a social issue. It's kind of from state violence. You can see it like this. Over the past 3.5 years, the situation is only worsened. The Taliban have tightened their control, issued dozens of decrees that iris women from public life and silent distance. What we are witnessing is not a temporary restriction. It is deliberated policy of Irja. Despite this, Afghan women, both inside the country and in exile, continue to resist. In Afghanistan, they organize underground schools, for example, protest on the street at great personal risk, and use every available platform to speak out. In exile, we amplify their voices, build transnational alliances, and work tirelessly less to keep the world's attention to their plight. Today, under Taliban rules, sorry, you can listen to me still, right? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Today, under the Taliban rule, Afghanistan is the only country in the world where girls are banned from education beyond the 6th grade. That fact alone should be a global wake-up call for everywhere and for everybody. The current situation is unsustainable and morally indefensible. Silence is complicity, and the Afghan woman inside the country and outside will not be silent, that's for sure.
Right. Thank you. So you mentioned gender apartheid and of course the resistance of women inside and outside the country. We will come back to you, Ms. Bowry. Now I would like to go to Ms. Freiheit Bossi. Ms. Freiheit Bossi, since you are working with the Human Rights Watch and you have been documenting human rights abuses in Afghanistan, how would you describe the human rights situation or the state of human rights in Afghanistan? What sort of human rights violations are happening under the Taliban? And maybe you can also share that what kind of abuses or violations of human rights Watch are documenting. And maybe if you can also share some about how challenges of documenting human rights situation in Afghanistan, because we already know the strict censorship in place in Afghanistan. So over to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ehsan, and thanks so much for arranging this webinar at a very timely event, because, I mean, this is happening at a situation that no one else really speaks about Afghanistan. No one else is really trying to look into what is happening. And that's one of the biggest challenges, to keep a spotlight on Afghanistan, because, I mean, I do think that the Taliban are using this gap to crack down more on the rights of women and girls. Mr. Bowry, I mean, I think very comprehensively discussed about what happened in the aftermath of the Taliban takeover. There is a de facto ban on women and girls' access to education beyond 6th grade. There are restrictions on many forms of employment for women in the country. There are only 3 exceptions. Women are allowed to work in the nutrition, health, and primary education sector, and beyond that, they're not allowed to work. There's lots of restrictions, for example, a requirement of having a full hijab and being accompanied by a mahram or a male guardian, even for these women who are working with aid sector. And that's one of the biggest challenges when we're speaking with the aid sector in Afghanistan on how they're operating. One of the challenges that they're bringing us and speaking about is actually toll on restriction on their female staff. I mean, women do not have the right to freedom of movement. They need to be accompanied by a mahram in some provinces when they're even going for shopping, in some provinces when they travel beyond 72 kilometers. Again, the Taliban are not a centralized structure. They take different positions in different regions and provinces of Afghanistan. So the implementation of these regulations and bans and rules really is up to the regional authority. So that's why we see lots of differences of implementation of these laws and regulation. Women do not have the right to freedom of assembly. They're not allowed to protest anymore. And I mean, in very basic words, women do not have any social life. There's no social aspect to that. I mean, the latest law on the promotion of virtue and prevention of vice that that came last August, in August 2024, I think was a further crackdown on the rights of specifically women and girls, but also all citizens of Afghanistan. So it also has restrictions for men in the country, right? I mean, women's voices cannot be heard outside the house anymore. Muslim women are being, instructed to not make friendship with non-Muslims. So all of these sort of things. And I mean, one of the things that is quite concerning for me, because Boris explained a bit about what is it here that concerns us? And for me, that's basically that the system that they're creating. It's not only about the laws and regulation. It's the public policing that they're promoting right now in Afghanistan. A taxi driver has the authority to identify if a woman has full hijab and actually has the authority to deny a woman to use public transportation. I think this is very dangerous, especially for the future generation of Afghanistan.
Right.
Human Rights Watch, I mean, is an organization who had documented violations in Afghanistan for years. During the 90s, the civil war, the first takeover of the Taliban, the past 20 years, and right now. One thing that I want to say is that our work has totally shifted, especially since the takeover. Access to information is becoming very limited. It has become so difficult to document abuses in Afghanistan, primarily because the Taliban are actively trying to block it. When something happens, the public, people are being advised, especially by the Department of Intelligence, not to speak to the media or any organization. And if in a situation where there is no independent local media in the country or any human rights organization in the country, of course, it's difficult for international organizations who document these sort of violations. I mean, our reports have documented crimes against humanity. I mean, the crimes against humanity, gender persecution, against women and girls. ICC has, recently requested applications of arrest warrants for 2 of the Taliban leaders based on this. We've also documented crimes against humanity committed by the ISKP against, Shia, specifically ethnic Hazara in Afghanistan. We have documented war crimes that happened by the Taliban in the case of Panjshir. Civilians had been killed, disappeared, extrajudicially killed and forcibly disappeared, tortured and detained, being accused of having any sort of link with the National Resistance Front, which is a small group still resisting in Afghanistan. And also, I mean, like extrajudiciary killings, for enforced disappearances, arbitrary detention and torture of former security officers, journalists, human rights defenders. And one of the things that is quite unique for Afghanistan is that in none of these cases, the Taliban have been held accountable to any of these. In most of these cases, when an arrest happens or when somebody is being picked up and it's totally disappeared, the Taliban do not bother to even explain what has happened, why this person has been detained, what are the allegations. We have had cases where journalists have been picked up and there has been no trial for months and months and months, and they've just been kept in detention. In some of these cases, they don't have access to lawyers, they don't have access even to their family members. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say that Afghanistan is the worst human rights crisis in the world in 2025.
The worst. Right.
I will stop here.
The worst human rights crisis. Yeah, and thank you so much. And you mentioned that they have not been held accountable. Of course, that's one of the most important issues. I'll get back to you on this, and more we can discuss about the crisis. So maybe I can move to Mr. Ramizi. Since Mr. Ramizi was there in Afghanistan during the, collapse, he came out of Afghanistan after the collapse. And of course, he has been working as in anti-extremism or anti-terrorism as a person who is doing research on anti-extremism or the counterterrorism. So many countries and many reports shows that there are, multiple foreign jihadist groups in Afghanistan, and they have sanctuary in Afghanistan under the de facto Taliban government. This has been one of the concerns which regional countries have raised, that maybe many terrorist groups might threaten their security, their national security. So do you think there is a possibility of these groups going beyond the border of Afghanistan and influencing Islamic groups in other countries and in the region, or even Europe and USA?
Thank you so much, Dr. Ehsan, and hello to all our friends who are joining us from all over the world. And thank you so much for the FNF for organizing of this timely event to discuss and share our concerns and what we should do for now and for the future of Afghanistan to protect human rights and defend freedom in the country. To answer your question, the short answer would be yes from my side. A number of reports from our organization side shows that unfortunately Afghanistan became a safe place, a safe haven for all terrorist groups once again. And it was exactly the thing that I and a number of our colleagues and a number of other civil society and human rights activists of Afghanistan did raise the issue many times, that the world has to pay attention exactly on Afghanistan. We should not experience again another 9/11 in the world. But unfortunately, right now, the things that we are experiencing, the reports that we have, all of them shows that Afghanistan is once again on the hand of a terrorist regime, and the terrorist regime is supporting all other groups who are terrorists, and they are providing them the opportunity to come in Afghanistan and to build their bases and continue their terrorist activities. Unfortunately, again, Afghanistan is a safe place for Daesh, for Al-Qaeda, for TTP of Pakistan, and many others. I was just reading the recent report, the 35th reports of the sanctions and monitoring team of UN. And on that report, the report shows that Taliban gave lands to more than 6,000 TTP members in Afghanistan. And it shows that they have close ties with each other. And the same reports shows that Taliban, they are providing trainings and safe places for Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups in all over the country. Also, there are a number of reports. For example, we can mention the evidence and the documents which recently released from the Afghanistan National Mobilization Front, that their evidence and their documents shows that Taliban distributed more than 20,100 passports to foreign terrorists, including Al-Qaeda, including TTP, Uzbekistan terrorist groups, and also about 100 passports to Syrian terrorists who are now based in Afghanistan. So to be honest, Afghanistan right now is a safe place for tourists. And obviously, if the world let Afghanistan on the current situation, it will be a big threat for the safety, for the security, and for the freedom of the region and the world.
Right. Thank you so much. And of course, this is one of the concerns. It's increasingly being pointed out by the regional countries and many of the international organizations as well. So maybe from the counterterrorism or anti-extremism point of view, we would ask the second question: how do you see the country's engagement with the Taliban? Anyway, I'll come back to you. Now I'll move to Dr. Farasu, and I have a kind of similar question, which I said now, that many countries, including China, Iran, Russia, and Central Asian countries, have kept their engagement the relationship with the de facto government, and US have also been kind of engaged in some levels. So how do you assess, Dr. Faraso, how do you assess the relationship of Taliban with China, Iran, Pakistan, and USA? And where do you think this will lead to? Maybe you can assess this in the light of your recent book on the proxy war in Afghanistan. Dr. Faraso?
Thank you very much, Dr. Resson, and thanks to FNF for organizing this event. It's a very timely event. So thanks for mentioning my book. So that book was covering, the book covered 2 decades from 2001 to 2021, about covered war in Afghanistan for 2 decades, which is one of the typical proxy war in 21st century that basically destroyed the state in Afghanistan, and proxy war designed in the way to undermine the state building in Afghanistan and state building efforts and the new political setup in Afghanistan after 2001. So because there was not a regional consensus on how international forces should be in Afghanistan and what they should do,
Right.
and because of the lack of consistency in Washington strategy in Afghanistan toward Afghanistan as well. So that's a complicated situation. So I think for more details, people can go to read the book.
Right.
So let me move to your question. It's much more current question related to current situation of Afghanistan under the Taliban. I think we can. I would like to highlight some key points here before moving to details. There is regional and international consensus that Afghanistan is a security black hole, if I use this in a metaphorical way, that it means that Afghanistan is is an uncertainty territory for security issues, and it's a factor of stability, the factor that undermines stability in the region. So that's a consensus among all actors in the region. So that's why everyone engaged with the Taliban based on pragmatic diplomacy to have intelligence access in Afghanistan, and also work with some faction within the Taliban to have access to work with them, to know basically what's going on within the country. This is totally different with the normal diplomacy engaging with the Taliban in terms of recognition, sharing values, and considering Afghanistan as parts of regional order or regional process that we have currently in the region. So from there, this means that there's a minimal expectation, which is much more based on security concern rather than any other issues. So for example, if you think about China's engagement with the Taliban, which is one of the highest level currently, given that the China accepted Taliban ambassador with a recognition, the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, that's mainly based on security concern. That security concern has 2 aspects. One is because of China's Uyghur separatist and extremists in Afghanistan and their long history with the Taliban. It's one. The second thing is China has a big international and regional developmental project, which is One Belt and One Road. And that's a question of security of that project in the region, and how Afghanistan will undermine the security of that big project, that mega project in the region. So, and at the same time, these regional countries, they all concerns about each other's influence in Afghanistan. For example, China want to know how the US work with the Taliban and how Pakistanis, and especially recent development between India and the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. So this is a much more based on geopolitical security driven concerns in the region. So coming to Iran, so Iran have also pragmatical engagement with the Taliban based on security calculation. Before that, I just briefly gave you background information that after 2014, Iranian engagement with the Taliban increased at that time against the US, and also concerned about in 2015 because of the ISIS in Afghanistan and ISIS in the Middle East. So that is a background. In that time frame, Iranian established some connection, some relationship with some groups within the Taliban in western parts of Afghanistan. And the Iranian train some of these groups to fight against the international force in Afghanistan, against the Afghan government. So now there's a key concern for Iranian government is the activities of ISIS-K in Afghanistan. That's one. The second thing is much more intelligence concerns that try to know what's going on in Afghanistan and what these groups are doing in the country, how many groups are there. At the same time, there's tension and problems between them when it comes to water management and also clash and border issues. And also the other concern is narcotic or opium in Afghanistan. So moving to Pakistan. So Pakistan has much more complicated case in this context, because Pakistan supported the Taliban for 3 decades to fight in Afghanistan and control Afghanistan. But something changed over this several years. For example, before 2021, after the withdrawal of the Soviet Union force in Afghanistan, so Pakistan had some sort of confidence that, okay, they now establish a friendly regime in Afghanistan, which means a client or proxy regime in Afghanistan at that time. So, and then can use that against India and Kashmir. So they train some of these proxy forces under the Taliban control in Afghanistan. But after 2001, Pakistan is mainly thought that, okay, US has short-term strategy and they somehow support the Taliban to retreat in Pakistan and provide them sanctuaries and training facilities. And also ideological and intelligence support. Once the Taliban come to power, Pakistan is expected that they have a friendly regime in Afghanistan. They come to Kabul and the head of ISI to basically help the Taliban officials to work together. But things changed after that, because we know Pakistan is a poor country. It doesn't have that much resource to manage proxy regime in a country like Afghanistan. So at the same time, historical ties with TTP and Taliban turned to a key concern, as Mr. Ramzi mentioned that. So if you look at the data 2024, the attacks in Pakistan originated from Afghanistan by TTP rise by 45%. So that's a key concern. And in the recent days, yesterday, a delegation came from Pakistan to Kabul to work together, and there's some positive narrative within that, their media, their public statements, but we don't know how things will develop in the future. So at the same time, Pakistan is concerned about Baloch insurgent movement attacking inside Pakistan. And the recent engagement between Pakistan and the Taliban regime, there's another concern for Pakistan. There's 2 strategic narratives in Pakistan. One says that, okay, in one of these narratives, that it's difficult to work with the Taliban. They will turn against the Pakistan and they host and they provide sanctuaries for TTP. That's one. The second one is, which is the dominating narrative within the think tanks and also within the security experts within Pakistan, that, okay, there's no option for Pakistan but to work with the Taliban. Before anyone else use the Taliban, they mean basically India. So they try to have engagement, work with the Taliban. But Pakistan learned a lesson from the past that they will not recognize the Taliban unilaterally. So whether there's 2 scenarios where big powers like the US and China recognize the Taliban, they will follow, or there's collective decision in the region, which is very highly unlikely a collective decision we have in the region to recognize the Taliban at the moment. So that's Pakistan. When it comes to the US, the US have also security concern, and the Trump administration, everything is not clear, it's certainty. And who knows if 1 week or tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, Trump says, okay, they would like to talk directly with the Taliban and giving the embassy to the Taliban in Washington. So we don't know, but at the moment, there's security concern, and also the Taliban rigid ideological position and the position against the women and systematic and institutionalized gender apartheid in the country, and highly exclusive regime, which is undermine other ethnic groups and other social groups in the country, domestic legitimacy crisis and lack of rule of law, all created obstacles for any actors at the region and international level to work with the Taliban and recognize the Taliban. To conclude in one line is that everyone have a silence diplomacy with the Taliban based on pragmatic engagement justification, which is mainly designed to focus on very specific, limited purpose to work with the Taliban because of security concerns. That's why it turned to be a silent diplomacy. But the concern for us, an Afghan from Afghanistan, that we're concerned about the country, as in the title of today's webinar mentioned that Afghanistan at crossroads. Yes, Afghanistan is at crossroads for everyone, but not because of the moving forward, but because of all this crisis. That how all these things will work together and how the country will be, future will be, how all these factors will shape the country's future. So all these factors at the moment is not in the way to think or design the diplomacy in the way to transform the country or change the Taliban. It's much more like practical engagement, much more like transactional diplomatic process. I would like to stop here.
So yeah, keeping this current situation and the complicated relationship of these countries in mind, we will come back to you with the question on way forward and where will this lead to. Thank you so much. Now, I mean, of course, I'll go back to Ms. Baburi, who discussed so many issues about the women's right, gender apartheid, erasure of women from public life, and of course, despite all this, the resistance of women, the advocacy and the protests women have held, not only inside Afghanistan, but also, of course, not only outside Afghanistan, but also inside Afghanistan, the resistance has been there. So this resistance, advocacy, protests, and activism in mind, I mean, inside the country, also outside the country. How would you see the role of Afghanistan's diaspora activists like you in Europe? And of course, media have had a big role in advocacy or reporting about the situation. So how would you see the role of diaspora as well as the media, Western media maybe, in improving or changing the situation of women in particular, but the overall situation? And the role of EU or EU member countries in improving the situation of human rights. What do you think? What role can they play? So this is the question to you, Ms. Baburi.
Thank you very much. Yes, the Afghan diaspora plays a vital role in preserving the voices that are increasingly silent within Afghanistan. Afghans living in exile, especially women, use their freedom of movement, their networks, and their presence in international forums to draw attention to the systematic denial of rights taking place in their homeland, for sure.
Right.
They often serve as a bridge between the situation inside the country and the global public. The role of the media, particularly Western media, is also crucial. They carry the responsibility of ensuring that Afghanistan is not forgotten. Unfortunately, media interest sharply declined after the withdrawal of international troops.
Right.
Reporting has become sporadic, which in turn reduce the pressure on the international community to respond, particularly or with humanitarian aid. Real change can only happen in the long term in the global narrative around Afghanistan continue to be shaped by the voices of those affected. And if Western media are willing to consistently provide a space for those voices.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the global narrative. Women have done a great job of filing complaints in the ICC, and of course, trying to criminalize the gender apartheid.
Absolutely.
And on the other side, media, as you mentioned, have had a great role. So how, I mean, if you would maybe share more about this campaign of gender apartheid. Plus, I wanted to ask this question personally because, I mean, of course, it came to my mind now that Do you think the Western media are following the policies of their governments, or they are independent in reporting about the violations of human rights in Afghanistan?
Not so much that it will bring or take changes inside Afghanistan. There should be much more of this. But really, I don't see it that the Western countries, they are not very interested in this terms, in these issues inside of Afghanistan. And in these days, especially in Germany, and I can see that with the new government, since some days, they are also talking about that they don't want to take more Afghans, even they are promised them to come to Europe because of the security. And so they are not really in big interest for this kind of issues.
Right.
If it's women rights or ethnic rights, it's not very the issues inside the governments in the Western countries these days, because they have all of them have today other problems also. And so they forgot also the promises they do for the Afghans inside the country.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Abbasi. Maybe now my questions to you. I mean, as you mentioned, the crackdown on the difficulty of documenting human rights violation in Afghanistan, and you mentioned different types of violations of human rights which are happening against women, girls, against the Hazaras, in Panjshir, and against the Turkmens, Uzbeks, or different ethnicities. Plus the target killing, and of course you mentioned that it's not that their rules and regulations are strict, but it's a whole system which creates the problem. So I mean, what do you think? What is the importance of documenting this human rights violation in Afghanistan? I mean, apart from the documenting human rights violation, what other options, or what other things the international organizations such as Human Rights Watch or UN agencies can do to bring accountability? One of the most important issues is accountability, to bring it into place. So if you would share your insights.
Sure. I mean, when it comes to the documentation, I believe that the first step for accountability is the documentation of violations. If you go back to the history of Afghanistan and see to what extent what happened in the 90s, for example, have been documented, there are very few reports, and there are very, a few thorough investigation about what exactly happened. And I mean, and documentation itself is part of the history of a country. In that sense, I think it is very important for us to document and monitor the violations that is happening right now in Afghanistan, specifically, especially by the Taliban against women and girls. It is becoming difficult because the Taliban also know that. Even though they haven't been recognized by anyone yet as a legitimate government, but they do care about their international image, and that's why it's important for them to not have so many reports criticizing them, right? I mean, I remember that at some point I was speaking with some women and girls in Afghanistan, and the whole event were around ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the International Court of Justice. So ICC has an ongoing investigation of Afghanistan. ICJ, there's a potential case against Afghanistan. And yeah, I mean, the whole idea was that who are the Taliban, that every international court is after them to hold them accountable for these violations. So I think in that sense it matters. And for all of these justice institutions to be able to look into what happened and then to move toward accountability, all these reports matter, all these context papers and documentation would really help them down the line. There is still a huge gap. I mean, it's worth to say that there was a huge gap in documentation in Afghanistan right now. I mean, organizations like Human Rights Watch, we have Amnesty International, we have so many great local human rights organizations who are also documenting what is happening in Afghanistan. I mean, there are, local NGOs led by Afghans who are also monitoring, and they better understand the context. They definitely have better access to the country. All these reports that are coming out of Afghanistan, there's still a big gap, because what we're hearing is just the tip of the iceberg. All what we are hearing is just just a bit of what we are hearing right now, because the Taliban, as I said, is blocking the documentation and monitoring. So it is difficult to get a real picture, a comprehensive picture of what is happening there. So, I mean, the numbers on extrajudicial killings, I think it's a few hundred of extrajudicial killing of former security officers, especially people who work with the former government. But again, I mean, the UN had published this. It would be difficult to say to what extent these cases have happened, because there are, hundreds of cases which will go unreported. So, in that sense, the gap, where I see the gap, and in no means I want to compare the situation in Afghanistan with Ukraine, but that was it was an interesting experience that I had. I was in Australia 2 years ago, and I was going around different cities, sharing panel with my colleagues who is covering Ukraine at Human Rights Watch. And in one of these panels at a university, I stood and asked us about accountability options for both countries that we have been working on. And I was fascinated by the number of options that my colleague had. She started with different UN mechanism, different institution that is currently documenting what is happening in Ukraine. And that itself was fascinating, because in Afghanistan, we literally have nothing. We have the UN Special Rapporteur, who has a mandate to monitor, provide report, and preserve information. No one is collecting evidence now. No one is preparing file cases. No one is currently documenting human rights violation in Afghanistan up to a standard that could be used as evidence in a court of law. And I mean, I am concerned that the physical evidence will go away. We have nothing from the Taliban in their first period. There's very little that we're hearing about what exactly they did in terms of documentation. And I'm worried that in 2025, the gap is still there. No one currently in Afghanistan is identifying perpetrators. So, I mean, this August will be the 4th anniversary of the Taliban takeover. In the past 4 years, I mean, ICC remains to be the only institution that has identified 2 members of the Taliban as, alleged perpetrators. No one else has identified who within the Taliban leadership is responsible, who within the Taliban leadership are actually coming up with these ideas, drafting all these regulation, and who is implementing it. I mean, that's huge. Who in Baghlan is implementing the PV law? Who in a village in Oruzgan is implementing the PV law? Because they're also responsible. No one is currently doing this in Afghanistan. While in other similar situations, we do have mechanisms. For example, in Syria, we have a UN mechanism. For Iran, I mean, recently the UN Human Rights Council established a mechanism. In Myanmar, we have a similar mechanism. I mean, for North Korea, we have a similar mechanism. But for Afghanistan, we're still struggling to get that.
Right. Thank you so much. Yeah. So not only documentation of all the violations are important, and it, of course, they are scared of the documentation and going to the courts, international courts, but also collecting evidence is the most important thing to be done. Now I'll move to Mr. Ramizi. I mean, what we discussed with Dr. Farasu mostly about the relationships of these countries, maybe from a anti-extremism point of view or perspective, or from a counterterrorism perspective, maybe you can discuss this. There is a humanitarian and economic crisis, which is we all know. And despite this, I mean, China has shown interest in investing in minerals, right? And similarly, US has been sending cash as a part of the humanitarian assistance. So, I mean, from this perspective, how do you see this engagement of different countries?
Thank you, Sansai. I think Dr. Sefer also mentioned and shared a lot of good information. But I would like to just add a couple of other issues from my own perspectives and from the things that we are doing and working on these issues. The first thing that I would like to mention is that we should not forget one thing, that China, Russia, and Iran were the first countries that they allowed Taliban to raise their flags, and they hand over the diplomatic mission of Afghanistan to a terrorist group. And this is so unfortunate that right now we see the rise of that they raise the flag of a terrorist group on our embassies, and they are working, and they have the control of our embassies on these three countries. For the China and Russia, what is important, as Dr. Frost also mentioned, is their own interest. So they are thinking about their interest, that how they should negotiate, how they should communicate with the Taliban. And mostly what they are thinking, for example, for Russia, that they are wondering a lot from ISK Daesh. They are working in a way with Taliban to, or they are thinking in a way that they should work with Taliban to keep them safe from Daesh. And the same thing with China, that they are wondering from the threats from your militants, and they are trying to work in a way with Taliban to keep them safe, and work with them in a way to Taliban should not allow Uyghur militants to use Afghanistan land in any kind of attacking or something, militant attacks to China. Other than that, this is so unfortunate that they are not respecting, they are not considering human rights, and they are not thinking about that. The only thing that they are thinking is about their own interests, so they should keep themselves safe.
So, do you
Also,
think, I'm
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, do you think their interests will align with the interests inside Afghanistan for long term, of course? Do you think there is an alignment of interest, kind of, do you share? Do you think they share this interest?
I think they have very strong connection, and they are sharing those interests with the Taliban. I'm completely sure with that, and the evidence shows also that. But other than that, as we see, as we experience, China is investing in extracting of natural resources of Afghanistan, which millions and millions of dollars they are misusing without any official protocol. They are extracting a number of natural resources of Afghanistan from around the country. And at the same time, let me also share one of our recent report, which shows that China is also not interested in investing in mines and extracting of the natural resources of Afghanistan, but at the same time now they are also investing in Afghanistan civil society organizations. Unfortunately, currently there are around 8 civil society organizations that they established by the support of China, and they are working actively in all over Afghanistan by supporting of other local NGOs that unfortunately it is very common in Afghanistan that a number of organizations, they are just looking for funding opportunities, and they are doing whatever the donors say to them. And they are supporting those organizations to do something against liberal democracy in Afghanistan, and to share and to promote their own ideologies in the country. Which this is an alarming for all civil society activists, for all human rights organizations, that we have to do a lot of work, and we have to document the things that China is doing in Afghanistan. Regarding the US, that they are sending money, cash, to Taliban. If you remember, when Trump stopped for a few weeks the international aid, Taliban directly organized a conference, a press conference, and they mentioned that they are not able to pay the salary of all government employees for the next 3 months. By considering of all these facts, I'm totally against the international aid, and especially the aid or the support which is going from the US side to Afghanistan. Because indirectly, all these supports goes to the pocket of Taliban, and they are misusing this money. And at the same time, I'm really in favor of cutting of all these supports to the current de facto regime, because they are misusing. And also when it's a kind of playing a game with Afghan people, with everyone on the country. We have to experience the complete isolation. Afghan people have to completely experience that. And I'm sure that on that time, we will have a very big and a very strong resistance against the current de facto regime.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of questions in the chat box, so maybe, I mean, time is also kind of a little less now. We have one last question from our panelist, Dr. Farasu. I mean, taking from where we discussed earlier in the first question, international organizations. I mean, now I would say that some of the international organizations like UN tried diplomacy, even European Union, they have tried diplomacy and some level of engagement in the past 3 years to change the situation in Afghanistan. So, I mean, if the engagement of these countries, which Mr. Ramizi also discussed, and you also discussed earlier, have been there. So, where do you think this will lead, and what is the prospect, actually? This is the biggest question. What is the prospect? Do you think there's negotiation or some sort of, engagement possible with Taliban? Do you think, I mean, this is a cliche question, but people might ask this kind of question. Will there be a second Bonn conference that would resolve the issue, Dr. Farasu? This is our last question, then we'll go to question and answer session. If anybody has a question, they can write their questions. Sorry, yeah.
Thank you. I think, I think we have to understand the condition and the context, right? Security context and the capacity of different actors within Afghanistan. So the Taliban is important for regional countries and international countries because of security reason and practical engagement, because they have capacity of repression, violence. They are highly ready to use violence for any sort of repression, and even at the level of crime against humanity and institutionalized gender persecution, whatever you see. They issued around 100 or more than that decrees just against women to restrict women's rights in all different fronts. So that's their capacity of violence. The second thing is their territorial control at the moment. So, and this territorial control and capacity of violence actually sustained by this practical engagement by the international community, which is Mr. Ramizi mentioned. I totally agree that sustained the Taliban and enabled the Taliban to use much of internal resources for their violence capacity and for their own governance and domination within the country. So that is a central problem when it comes to international pressure on the Taliban. In other words, I think if there's these pressures or there's restrictions just for practical purposes, for security or for information sharing, things like that, which is much more driven by security interest. I think if international pressure and sanctions on the Taliban is based on transformative approach to change the Taliban, and based on non-negotiable benchmarks based on human rights and inclusion, I think if that pressures happen, that will have at least two reasons. One, it will widen the gap between different factions of the Taliban. Second, that will boost the morals and the political capacity of anti-Taliban forces. And also would like to add the last point is that will force Mullah Hibatullah, their leader, to think by his right corner of brain. So that is, but we don't have that levels of pressure in the Taliban. We much more have some sort of short-term interaction based on security, things like that. But as mentioned before, all these actors, somehow they know that the security and stability in Afghanistan is not sustainable with the Taliban for a long run. So that's a problem. So now coming back to your question about a second Bonn conference or something like that, I think the solution is to think about some levels of a balance against making a balance or supporting a balancing for within Afghanistan against the Taliban. Without that, I think it's difficult with this fragmented approach and unified approach to force the Taliban to really change some of their policies against women, against minorities, or have a constitution or rule of law or domestic legitimacy or accountability. So, so this is a question that how this fragmented international approach to the Taliban, they somehow boost the Taliban's position at domestic level that look, people coming to them and want to talk with them. So, but they don't want to compromise the so-called Afghan Islamic values. They play with that card and try to boost their authoritarian position within the country and somehow some sort of legitimacy. And the last point, I didn't want to take your time. The last point, all we're talking about this pragmatical engagement with the Taliban or silence diplomacy, but we all should be careful about a false narrative around that. And that false narrative at the international level is that, okay, look, Taliban bring security in Afghanistan and the violence drastically reduced. That's false because the Taliban was fighting against the government and destroying schools and doing suicide attacks, using IED, whatever. They were in charge of that insecurity, and now they are controlling the country. So this false narrative. We should be careful about that. The second thing is, I think all Afghans at different stage and international level with different media, I think we should think about a different concept of security when we think about security in Afghanistan and international and regional countries think of security. To think about security from the counter-terrorism perspective. But as an Afghan in Afghanistan, I think we should think from a security from much more modern perspective. In that modern perspective, you're not thinking security from the traditional perspective, it's state security or things like that, or terrorist attacks happen in India or Pakistan or other countries, where Central Asian terrorist groups have providing propaganda in local language under the Taliban control in the north part. So those are much more traditional concept of security. From Afghan perspective, security for us is something different. For us, security is respecting pluralism in the country, inclusion in the country, and also justice, the peace, order, anything should not come at the expense of justice. And also from the gender perspective. Look, recent reports shows that Afghan women between 50 to 70%, they says they are not safe, they don't self-secure. If they're going anywhere, they have to go with mahram. They cannot go to public space. They cannot go to work. They cannot get education. This is insecurity. And people do not have any rights of the political movement, and they don't have any voice, something like that. So any consideration and discussion about security and security narratives about engagement with the Taliban should be from the Afghan perspective, that what security means for the Afghan women, for Afghan girls, Afghan children, ordinary Afghan inside Afghanistan, and the levels of poverty, and all these levels of the complex social security problem. We should think it from that perspective, not just currently the whole narrative of security and definition of security related to Taliban reduced to terrorist activities, which are defined by regional and international countries based on their security interests. But there is a lack of narrative from our perspective when it comes to security. I think Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung mentioned rightly that there is gap in coming to information and documentation. That information gathering and documentation, supporting civil society, diaspora, and Afghan activists for human rights and women's rights, that's the key to provide to do the documentation. The last point to basically have the documentation to solve the problem is to support those media that they are focused on human rights. So currently we have very functional media platform operating from outside, from exile. They can help looking with local people. I think international community, human rights organization can support them. That is significantly helpful for documentation. Just my own experience. When I read when I did my research on different topics, I really understood the significance of these media platforms, how they play significant roles in documentation. That's the key. For whatever purpose in the future, we have a liberal and democratic country in Afghanistan. That's the key to be considered. So just a conclusion. Yes, for conference like Second Boon, yes, but for that we need a condition to support Afghan voices first, to have a voice for Afghans first, for different segments of society, including gender balance. Then if they're wise, then there is a condition and a framework for bargaining, for leverage. The international community can invest on that, can support on that, and then we can consider different kinds of diplomatic processes for dialogue, for pressing the Taliban, for inclusive, for justice, for constitution, for democracy, and for domestic legitimacy. I would like to stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farosu, and thank you all of the panelists. So we have some questions. Some of them have been directed to specific panelists. Some have been answered. Ms. Abbasi has answered questions. So we'll take 2 or 3 questions because we are a little short of time. So there's a statement that to Ms. Baburi, there's a statement that I mean, it's not surprising that male are suppressing female. So there's a question from Ms. Akshaya that who is that entity responsible for intervening when a military group gains control of a country? So why are they not doing? I think this question is directed to either Mr. Ramezi or Dr. Farosu. Maybe very short, briefly, each one of you. Mr. Ramezi, maybe.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Yeah, I would like to answer this question and also the next one. I think for the Taliban and how they are playing to they should import these terrorists in Afghanistan. For example, based on a number of evidence, on a number of reports, and especially the report of the UN that I mentioned earlier, all of them shows that they are bringing all these terrorists in the country under the name of newcomers or under the name of refugees. For example, they are bringing a number of TTP members and they are giving them the passports and all documents, and they are sending them to the provinces that the majority of those provinces are Pashtuns. For example, Paktia, Logar, Khost, and these provinces. For the Uyghurs militants, they are giving the opportunity for them they should have the passport and all the ID of Afghanistan under the tribe of Hazaras, and they are sending them mostly to the central provinces of the country. Right. And the same thing they are doing for the Uzbekistan terrorists. They are sending them mostly to the northern provinces of the country. It is like a
I mean, is there a kind of international military entity to intervene? I mean, that's a question, but kind of what's Security Council of the UN, or they can decide about that?
Yeah, they have the reports, but not interfering on that. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, there are 2 questions one question to Ms. Abbasi. I think you have replied to many of the questions. To Ms. Baburi, there is one question. Sorry, I think that question is already answered. So Mr. Raghav Sharma has asked if there is a consensus on being a security Afghanistan being a security black hole, why are all countries not just engaging the Taliban but have gone a step further by delisting the Taliban as a terrorist entity? What is your vision for long-term stability in Afghanistan that balances geopolitical realities and the country's development needs? Maybe Mr. Farasu, Dr. Farasu, you can answer to this question.
Yeah, that question has 2 points. One is why countries engaging with the Taliban with security concern and delisting them from the terrorist list, and the second one is how political stability can be achieved in the future. So the second aspect, the second point of the question, look, the countries for the pragmatical engagement, they try to make the engagement possible with the Taliban. So those movements that delisting them from the terrorist list, there's two observations with that. The first one is a pragmatical and tactical move to make the engagement with the Taliban possible, because at the same Taliban also want to have something when they engage with these regional countries. The second thing is the whole list has been under the war and terror discourse from 2021. And that war and terror discourse, war against terror discourse, is somehow disappeared at the moment. It's not much in its peak, its momentum at the moment. So countries, were not at the same page at the United States with the United States at the time defining terrorism and international politics. They feel not very comfortable to have this definition and hold this narrative or respect this narrative. So they put their national interest and security interest first and try to delist to make their engagement with this group possible. If they still have them as a terrorist, so probably internally and externally, it's difficult for them to justify. But from the strategic perspective, I think this is much more tactical to make the practical engagement possible. It doesn't mean that all these countries, they know the Taliban are good actor and they stabilize Afghanistan, and they are an actor in the region that will contribute to regional stability. I think they know about that. The second point of question, look, if you look at the Afghanistan history, there is not mainly in the broader narrative when it comes to Afghanistan crisis. The literature focused on international intervention in Afghanistan during the Cold War and after that, all these problems. And the second one is if you provide in two major group, there's all literature and argument, is focused on internal or domestic factors like ethnic discrimination, lack of legitimacy, or identity crisis in Afghanistan. So different arguments. I think for a long-term stability in Afghanistan, we should consider both. Any government in Afghanistan, first of all, should have internal legitimacy. If there is no internal legitimacy, there is violence and repression. The rest of the political actors or the other groups on the opposition side, they don't have any room, and they believe the political setup is not doesn't have legitimacy. So they will go for external support. That's a well-established argument within the literature about international security, proxy war studies, all of this. The proxy actors is not just simply a mechanical movement that external actors to create some movements to go and fight. So these proxy actors, they have internal and domestic agendas. So if there is lack of legitimacy, they will push all these political actors to go for external support. So the implication of that argument is that any political setup in Afghanistan should have internal legitimacy, inclusion, transparency, rule of law, and human rights. Without these factors in countries like Afghanistan with diverse social, with cultural diversity, with ethnic diversity, it's not possible. The second factor is, one of the key elements in Afghanistan, Afghanistan crisis is its ethnic-based foreign policy. When it comes to their own line, engagement with crisis with Pakistan, and all these factors. In the future, any political regime or government, any political setup should solve these problems. Look, historically, most of this Afghan government, they somehow accepted directly or indirectly, explicitly or implicitly, neutrality in foreign policy. But in practice, they never been neutral. They had territorial claim, the crisis with Pakistan basically since the time of Dawood Khan, it started based on that crisis, based on that problem. So that what is the cost of that? The cost of that is the current crisis that we have, and the proxy war in Afghanistan. So the bottom line is that internal legitimacy and inclusive government plus neutral and constructive foreign policy with neighboring countries. These two factors is the key factors that would help Afghanistan go to political stability in Afghanistan. And for Afghan elite, the key message is, and the Afghan elites, the one line, that we should change our concepts of state in Afghanistan. Mainly our elite, we understand state as ethnic or group domination in Afghanistan. With that concept, we cannot destabilize Afghanistan.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have so many questions, and I'm sorry to each and every one of the audience who asked questions and their questions have not been answered. I'm sorry, so many good questions have been asked, but we are out of time. And without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Frank Hoffman from the AFNF for the closing remarks. Thank you so much, all of the audience and panelists. Yeah, Mr. Frank.
Yeah, very good evening, and thank you, Reza. Yeah, thank you also to all our panelists, Dr. Farasu, Shikiba, Ms. Abbasi, and Mr. Ramizi. Dear participants, yeah, we've heard a lot about Afghanistan. I mean, in 2021, the world really well witnessed a dramatic collapse of the republic, and Afghanistan hasn't had an elected government since. We have seen the collapse of democratic institutions, a disregard of civil liberties and human rights, and a dramatic rise in risks to international security. The regime is by and large internationally isolated. However, as we heard today, major powers are positioning themselves. It is therefore tantamount for the European Union to find a strategy. But we also heard today that there's numerous challenges and pitfalls. It is crucial because, I mean, or not only because there is hundreds of thousands of Afghans in Europe, there's actually more people of Afghan heritage in Germany than there are people of Indian heritage. It is also crucial because a lot of the things we see in Afghanistan well, pose a danger to the order that is the foundation for Europe's prosperity. For FNF, it is an important issue because a lot of the things that we see in Afghanistan go against the very grain of every liberal. We spoke a lot about violation of human rights and individual liberties, especially violation of rights of women in the country. FNF is a facilitator and provides a platform for discussions like these on issues pertaining to Afghanistan, but also on a lot of other geopolitical and international security issues. So, dear participants, please stay tuned for future events. Do follow us on social media. And allow me to close by thanking once again all our panelists, our moderator Reza, the teams in the background, the teams of the Naumann Foundation and of our IT service provider Comdoc, and of course thank you very much to you, our participants. Before you head out, I believe we have a little feedback form, yeah, which you can see here. So please take a moment and give us some feedback so that we can improve on our events in the future. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, and to everyone who's celebrating that, happy Easter.